save human rights from themselves to some extent. To do this, I think it's important to accept that they are political. And it's important that they're political. Because part of the problem is this depoliticization of human rights. They become legitimate because they're not political. They become associated with some kind of, with a law that is ostensibly impartial, neutral, and objective. They are above the political frame. On the contrary, I think they are absolutely political. The second thing I think we need to do is accept that they are not universal. And this is a liberating idea in the sense that rather than working with some kind of idea of an absolutist universality, of an imposed common humanity that people around the world have been forcibly made to conform with. So, in Iraq, for example, bringing democracy and human rights through war, aggression, and violence is ultimately paradoxical. But it's the idea of lesser peoples, of lesser civilizations who have to conform to this idea of a common humanity. If we abandon this, if we change our language and understand that human rights can be an ongoing, open discussion, it opens different possibilities. So one of the things I was thinking about was using the idea of universalizability rather than universality. Now, it's an idea that I'm uncomfortable with, that I find problematic, that I'm trying to work through. But basically, I was wanting to use it to convey the idea that rights emerge, again to quote Bakshi, through the rightless. The authors, the writers of human rights are the rightless, and they do it in struggle. They emerge from the bottom up rather than from the top down. They are immanent rather than transcendent. And this means that through activism, through negotiation, through argumentation, we can engage in discussions about their universalizability. They unfold in different places, in different ways, at different times, in different contexts. But we can engage in an argument, as we've done in the conference so far, say about LGBT rights, about the bodily integrity of women, things that, from my perspective, are absolutes. But I think they have to be argued for. They have to be campaigned for. We have to try and universalize them rather than assuming they are like, our genes, universal from the outset. So I think we need to, those are the choices, it seems to me, to abandon them as irredeemably tainted, to accept a limited version, or to try and look at politics in a different way. So to go back for a third time to Upendra Bakshi, he talks about a politics of human rights and a politics for human rights. The politics of human rights is the politics of Bush and Blair, a politics of using human rights, and I will quote him, where human rights become the pursuit of politics, often via aggression and war. A politics for human rights is an alternative politics seeking to make the state incrementally more ethical, governance progressively more just, and power increasingly accountable. It's an ongoing struggle on the ground. So, I think to conclude, I wanted to raise one other perspective. There's another friend of mine who's done a lot of work in Latin America. His name is Boaventura de Souza Santos. He's a legal sociologist who's done much work in Bolivia and Ecuador with plurinational constitutions, working with the idea, to go back to Robbie's presentation yesterday, about indigenous knowledges. And he talks about a subaltern cosmopolitanism from below, based on a different way of thinking about the world, a different cosmology, a cosmology that doesn't accept or doesn't begin from the possessive individualism that has characterized the dominant conception of human rights. And he calls, in a different way, for the emergence of a subaltern cosmopolitan legality that emerges from the lived experiences of the traditional communities of suffering in the global south, as he calls them. And in these ways, I think we can treat human rights as tactics. They are, rather than as, if Bakshi makes the dualism of politics of and for human rights, I also see a danger in politics as human rights, in which politics is reduced to human rights, in which there's no more to the politics than human rights themselves. And again, coming out of a struggle, for example, in South Africa, human rights were used towards something more than themselves. And we can use them by exploiting the contradictions, if you like, that power always faces. The kind of things that you're using in Singapore. Every gap, every possible contradiction that can be opened up, that can be used against them by using human rights, is maybe a kind of politics in and of themselves. And I want to end by quoting Claude Lefort, who puts it, I think, better than I can. From the moment when the rights of man are posited as the ultimate reference, established right is open to question. While a class may have effective means at its disposal to exploit for its own ends and to deny others the guarantee of rights, and while power may have effective means to subordinate the administration of justice or subject laws to the imperative of domination, nevertheless, these means remain exposed to an opposition in terms of right, an opposition de droit. There is developed on the basis of human rights a whole history that transgressed the boundaries within which the state claimed to define itself, a history that remains open. And finally, if I can find it, another quote that I liked very much when I was doing the research for this paper, from Judith Butler, about the difficulties of and the contradictions we face in struggling on a foreign terrain. She was talking about struggle for women's rights, about feminism. But she, as she puts it, when we do this kind of politics, we should do so aware of being implicated in that which one opposes, of turning power against itself to produce alternative modalities of power, to establish a kind of political contestation that is not pure opposition, but a difficult labor of forging a future from resources inevitably impure. And so I think the history of women's struggle around the world has been an indication of the kind of paradoxes and contradictions, of trying to gain admission to law's empire when men are used as a yardstick, so that every step is a step closer, perhaps to a glass ceiling that may need other means besides rights, besides law, to break through. So I hope some of these ideas in thinking about the possibilities of using rights for empowerment in relation to a hegemonic discourse that is designed in many ways to generate impetus may lead to some kind of discussion afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sam, for this critical and forth-talking thought. Now I would, without further delay, to give the floor to Professor Sani. Please, the floor is yours.
Very good morning. First of all, I think I want to say thank you to the organizer for inviting me to come here and so present my work. Probably my presentations for this morning are a bit different compared to Professor Edmund, even though I think we will both cover basically the theoretical aspect of human rights. Mine, I think, a bit different because I will look from the context of communitarianism. And it's a comparative between a old and also a new communitarianism. And what I try to cover is looking in the context of ASEAN as an organization and as a regional organization, and how ASEAN try to somehow bring human rights as an agenda, and also try to form a mechanism in order to suit the demand actually, from the peoples around the Southeast Asian nations. So, okay. What actually I want to say in this presentation, so this actually is based on my paper, just recently published. Actually, there's a shift. You can see that if you study about ASEAN, the development of ASEAN as a regional organization, communitarianism always the words used by the leaders of ASEAN. And also, if you study about ASEAN values, I think you will listen to the words like community-based society, something like that. So that's the element that they propagate, especially by the leaders of Asian nation, people like Mahathir, Lee Kuan Yew, even Suharto, and so on. But what I try to argue is that since year 2000 until today, you can see there's a shift. Even though it's very slow, there is a shift from organization that propagates old communitarian approach to a new communitarian, and also at the same time also the shift also will include also ASEAN as a state-based organization to a more people-based organization. So that's probably I want to explain in this presentation. So in overall there are three sections in this paper. I try to locate the debates on ASEAN in communitarian perspective. And secondly, I try to use some cases to explain the paradigm of the debates. And last but not least, I also try to look at a new approach, a new people-based organization in ASEAN operates by specific reference to ASEAN Human Rights Commissions. Okay, actually this paper actually I co-authored with one of my colleagues, Dr. Abu Bakar Ibihara. This is the paper just recently published by the Japanese Journal of Political Science. I think because of this also, the organizer invited me to do the presentation on about these topics. So, okay, what is old communitarian and also neo communitarians? If you see the tone of the language, the approach that the old communitarian tried to bring is always mentioned about community, the approach towards community over individuals, responsibility, duty over rights, consensus based on elite deliberations, state-oriented in decision-making, and also at the same time discourage civil society involvement. It's more or less a very state-centric approach, in the context of old communitarian. So in the case of ASEAN, since the development until probably the 1990s, you can see this is the main approach propagated by ASEAN nations. Okay, but since year 2000, you see the language a bit different. The tone is a bit different. So it seems that there's a leader of ASEAN also at the same time, and also the approach actually try to embed some of a liberal idea, because there are also things that individuals of some is right, it's very important, and can be accepted, universally, But somehow in Asian community also is very important. They want to maintain these ideas of communitarian-based society still. They believe that it still exists in the context of Asian nation, and also should be practiced. But at the same time, they don't want to disregard individuals' rights. So that's why you can see the language is like in balancing community rights with individuals' rights. Balancing responsibility, duty with rights, and also at the same time inclination towards consensus. Still consensus, but with public deliberations. Not elite deliberations. So supporting people's-oriented in decision-making, and encourage, now they try to encourage civil society involvement. Unlike before, where try to disregard any involvement of civil society in any decision-making in the context of ASEAN. Okay, and somehow in order to see this two approach of communitarianism, we need to somehow ask, questions. whether does the policy brought by ASEAN represent a convergence of interests of the nation involved and affected. And second is it legitimate according to the values of those involved and affected, and if it did not, can they be persuaded to accept change in their values? So, and does the policy contribute to building community or undermining its evolutions? So these are questions need to be asked to leaders of ASEAN, whether they can somehow change a little bit the approach. If they change, how much they change? So you need to ask some of these questions. But based on my paper, I managed to see that the shift and the change does exist in three contexts. First, I think we need to trace back the development of ASEAN. ASEAN way is always the key principles in relation between ASEAN nations and so on. So this, I think, they will maintain. The ASEAN nation cannot disregard this. They say that it's very important not to do direct intervention to other nations. But actually, in year 1990s, you can see the development. Some leaders pressure ASEAN nation to perform some kind of different approach. It started with Anwar Ibrahim with constructive interventions, because they see what happened in Myanmar, in Cambodia, several other countries. There's a violation of human rights, even in the Philippines and so on. So then they say that you need to intervene. But of course, all states in ASEAN nations believe that ASEAN way need to be upheld in any relations. And later comes Surin Pisama also argue the same things. Even the words different, but I think the content is almost similar. Flexible engagements. But many leaders, especially from Malaysia, for example, like Abdullah Mahdawi, former Prime Minister, actually before that, former Foreign Minister, argue that we can accept this flexible engagement. There's no way other ASEAN nation can intervene in any other ASEAN nation that have a crisis or abuse of human rights, something like that. So then, what happened is that when Surin Pesawan became Secretary General of ASEAN, I think probably he realized that he can do something. So that's why he started to inject some of ideas, liberal ideas in the organization. So it's kind of acceptable, to engage, directly to the nation, especially like Myanmar. Actually, many argue why suddenly Myanmar changed from a military, regime, control Myanmar, suddenly Myanmar transformed into, very quickly to a democratic state. So even though still there's a process need to be done, but actually there's an involvement directly from the ASEAN. I think I remember I attended one conference in Jakarta. Dr. Surin Pesawan did mention that he directly engaged Myanmar after the disaster, the Najis typhoon happened. So Myanmar suffered, and they asked ASEAN. Actually ASEAN pushed them first, but then they asked ASEAN to get involved to help them to resolve the issue. So then from there it started, process until the change of systems on. So you can see that even though it's very slow, but ASEAN changed in terms of the approach. Then come to ASEAN community. So in 2003, ASEAN realized that they need to have more or less like European community, but it's a bit different. So they tried to impose ASEAN community in 2015, probably in less than 2 years run away. So under the ASEAN community, there are three pillars. One is ASEAN political security communities, ASEAN economic communities, and also ASEAN socio-cultural communities. In fact, if you see the motto, the charter, really, really catch the idea of communitarianism. One vision, one identity, and one community. So that's the approach. But if you look closely, the blueprints from each of these three pillars. From ASEAN political security community, it seems that ASEAN as an organization, or ASEAN as a nation, try to still uphold several old communities' values, or ideas, So they talk about shared values, norm, cohesive, peaceful, stable, a resilient region with shared responsibility and so on. So it seems that the old idea is still there. And similarly, the case of ASEAN Economic Community, the properly mentioned about the economic first argument. Economic first argument is an argument from ASEAN values. So it seems that they still want to maintain the old ideas of communitarianism. But when it comes to social cultural communities, you can see that the approach is a bit different. Instead of state-oriented, state-centric, they want to apply some more people-oriented approach. So then, under the blueprint, also they think about human development, social welfare, and try to bring together, the civil society in decision-making process. So that's I think is very interesting. You can see the development, the shift is happened through this ASEAN social cultural community. Okay. And what's interesting also the blueprint ASEAN social cultural community. You can see that under ASEAN Charter, they need to establish ASEAN human rights body. So under Article 14, so it's really mentioned that ASEAN human rights body need to be formed and also to perform to ensure that the human agenda must be practiced effectively in the context of ASEAN. Okay, and ASEAN human rights body will require this, effective participation of civil society in processing or establishing the body and in its functioning. Second is the process of establishing and its functioning to be transparent and inclusive. At the same time, the body of the independent and impartial, in order for it to be able to hold the government accountable, it should also be equipped with monitoring powers. Okay, somehow there are many hurdles in order to implement all this. So I will share with you some of the process. At first, they agreed to establish the intergovernment. It's called Intergovernment Commission on Human Rights. So it's just an intergovernment body, But somehow the NGO thinks that they need to participate, get involved as well, to form the declaration, also to form the agenda of these commissions. So they have very debates on this. And NGO like Singaporean-based human rights, NGO and Marwah very actively do engage with this international, all the representative from each of the government in ASEAN. So, and the debate is still going on, but there are lot of progress and lot of compromise. Either coming from the government, also coming from the NGO, in order to form these commissions. For example, I give you few example. Yusuf Kala, the former Vice President of Indonesia, and also Raisi Yatim, former Foreign Minister of Malaysia. Yusuf Kala is a former Vice President of Indonesia. Still want to impose some principle of ASEAN values in this even declaration, even the process, the practice of the Commission. But Suri Pesawan said no, cannot. We cannot go back to the old idea. We need to move on. So sometimes bit tensions the process, but somehow the good thing is ASEAN now can accept some of the idea and documents of human rights. For example, like in 13 June 2004, it adopted the Jakarta Declaration on Elimination of Violence Against Women in ASEAN regions. So it's followed with ASEAN Declaration Against Trafficking in Person, particularly women and children. And going through the Vienna Asian Program, ASEAN agreed also to the Declaration of Protection and Promotion of the Rights of Migrant Workers. So in year 2012, ASEAN also adopted through the Phnom Penh Declaration what we call is ASEAN Human Rights Declarations. Almost similar like Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but the difference is still there's an element of state to determine the process, the implementation of human rights in each of the country. For example, like under Principle 6 and also in Principle 7. So in conclusion, you can see that I just want to show that there's a shift, agenda even very slow, and you can see also very minimal, but at least there's a change in the process, and also ASEAN can accept human rights is one of the main important component in the organization. So, and you see that there's also a lot of engagement now between the government and also society in order to ensure human rights can be practiced well in ASEAN nation, and also at the same time, so they know ASEAN always elitist. I call it elitist organization. Yeah? The decision always made by the elites. But now they try to engage people. But very slow, I think. Yeah? I think based on my observation in Indonesia and also in Thailand, I think it's better than Malaysia in terms of they engage the people. Meaning that they give awareness to people how important is ASEAN agenda. But what I think is lacking is most of the promotion of ASEAN agenda or ASEAN community is about economic community. It's not about social or social-cultural community or even political security community. But in the case of Malaysia, sadly, I think there's very limited promotion of ASEAN community. In fact, people also don't know what happened to ASEAN community. Just about less than 2 years, it's going to be realized, but we still don't know what's actually ASEAN community. So that's the problem with now with ASEAN is they need to have more promotion on terms of context, and at the same time also need to promote human rights as a main agenda for the nation. Even though the process is still long, because according to NGOs, they want to impose somehow like the European Union, meaning that you have court, that can judge or people can bring cases to the court to decide if any abuse of human rights happen in the country. But I think that process is still very long, and also need more debates how the best approach to be implemented. But yeah, until today, I think it's still good, but still very slow in terms of progress of to implement human rights as a main agenda of ASEAN. So I think thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Aziz, for your information on the developments within ASEAN with concerns on human rights and human rights discourse. Before I open the floor for questions and remarks, I would like to briefly summarize the most important aspects of both presentations. Sam gave us a critical assessment of the current hegemonic discourse on human rights, spoke of the appropriation of these human rights by the West and the instruments and institutions to implement this discourse universally. And he presented us the possible counter-narrative, counter-discourse, focusing on the work of people from the bottom in their efforts to address the people in power, to reappropriate the discourse. My question would be here, as you mentioned yourself, this is to speak to people in power, to ask them to turn, as you said, to turn the power against themselves. So I was wondering, in my opinion, this would be very difficult. It would need to have a change in the understandings of maybe, we would have maybe to go back or down to fundamental categories of understanding of what is politics, what is power, what is law. You spoke of subalternal legality, and maybe also fundamental, what is the political itself, so that progressively there would be change into what would be the institutional mechanism to safeguard them universal human rights, if it's not the law, or if it's not the law as we know, as you understand it, right now. Now, as it is not politics in the form of power politics, which seems to be the characterization of modern politics. That would be my question to you, Sam. Professor Sang, Professor Aziz, thank you for giving the shift, and you give also a historical approach where this shift from old to new communitarianism comes, and you concluded with a skeptical, oh no, not skeptical, but maybe a slightly positive, say that there is a long way to go, mostly based on the institution of including the people in the decision making. You mentioned examples of people now having the opportunity to go to appeal to the courts in case of human rights violations. My question would be, given the diversity of the political systems, besides the principles of non-interference, but given the diversity of political science and the institutional mechanisms and settings of these countries, especially the role maybe of courts, I would be asking you if this is something which gives us great hope that there will be an ASEAN mechanism of human rights protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think perhaps the best way I can respond to Quang's question is by looking at the experience of my own country. After the years of apartheid, what we have now in the most liberal constitution in Africa, which incorporates socio-economic rights in an unprecedented way, is a vast improvement, obviously, on what we had before. We now do have the rule of law. So we have made a giant step forward, but it's not enough. We now have formal equality, but we still have substantive inequality. So that the law, I think it was Anatole France put it, the law in all its majesty prevents both rich and poor from sleeping under bridges and begging in the streets. So in South Africa now, we have political power in the hands of the black majority, but economic power remains overwhelmingly racialized and still very much in the hands of a white minority. We have massive impoverishment, we have massive corruption, and huge inequality in the society. These are characteristics of neoliberal capitalism. All the wonderful BRIC countries, shining India, glorious China, are characterized by massive corruption and inequality. So the point here is that human rights are a means to somewhere else, to something better, to a greater sense of justice, to the eradication of poverty. They're important, but they're not the end in and of themselves. And yes, we had to go back to basics, if you like, to reach a settlement through a constitutional convention, to decide what kind of society we wanted to be and how that would be reflected in a constitution that contains human rights. And perhaps that's a lot of what's happening here in Thailand at the moment. Decisions, political decisions about who has power that will take a form in the future in some way or shape as law, as right.
Just to respond to your questions, I think it's one of the main issues of concerning many, almost all of them, Asian nations is about whether we can allow or we can surrender our sovereignty. So that's the main issue. I think it's also this thing exists in the formation of the European Union. That also exists in the context of Asian nation. For example, like if there is a ASEAN court that judge or prosecute or even that consider higher than the national court. So I think Asian countries need to give, they give like what the perception is to give the sovereignty to other entity that's more powerful than the state itself. So that they have a very difficult to accept this approach. So that's why, in terms of human rights mechanism, it's very difficult to implement. To what, for example, like what suggested by the NGOs, to have a European court declaration. Yes, declaration we have, commission we have, but not court. So that's, I think, because of the issue of sovereignty. That's why ASEAN believe that the best approach, to resolve any issue is through the backdoor approach, through ASEAN way. So probably that's the best way. So yeah, let's see what's happened, because I'm a bit optimistic that along the way, the culture evolved, and then also the approach also evolved. Now you can see they already changed the approach, but I don't know how far they will change, whether they follow that European Union or whatever. I'm not sure. But I'm optimistic that they will change that. But the only thing is, what's the future approach that implemented by the ASEAN? We don't know yet. But it seems that they're still really persistent in terms of rejecting the idea of court and everything. Just resolve in an ASEAN way. So that's their approach. So probably that's an answer to the question.
Thank you very much. I open the floor for questions. Let me make a list. Professor Kapur, Khalida, and there was a fourth. Five. Okay. Remy and Professor Sanders. Okay. Professor Ratna.
Thank you very much for those wonderful, inspiring interventions and presentations. So this is directed to your paper a little bit, trying to engage with some of your ideas. I guess I'd like you to expand a little more on universality. Okay. After the critique of human rights that you make and other scholars have made, that it doesn't lead to freedom and emancipation. And even Wendy Brown, when she speaks about human rights, it's not just that. She's saying there's these liberalism of fear scholars who say, yes, we accept it doesn't lead to happiness and it doesn't lead to freedom. It leads to a little bit of alleviation of suffering. But she identifies how that alleviation of suffering is also connected to a broader agenda of thriving markets and a very specific notion of how to live in the world and be happy. So my question is sort of this, that what is the urge then, after this critique, that continues to inform the desire or the drive for acquiring human rights, once we know that the critique exposes the fact that it doesn't lead to freedom and liberation? Gayatri Spivak said, rights are something that we cannot not want. But I'd add to that, even though they cannot give us what we want. Right? So if that's the case, then why do we want them? And it comes back to your response, in fact, to Quine's question, is that you said, yes, it's given a rule of law, but what kind of rule of law? One that's regulating, one that is disciplining. Is it necessarily freeing or liberating? Has it really, cabined subjectivity and expressions of freedom? And you already mentioned economic rights now are so closely aligned with the neoliberal project. So I really would like to push you a little bit more. Is why do we feel like we need to keep on reinvesting in this project with the desire that it's going to give us something that it seems to me it can never give us?
Yeah, Ratna, thanks. I have problems with this. It's kind of, to use a French expression, faute de mieux, for want of something better, human rights. And I'd actually written down Spivak's quote about rights are something we cannot not want. It's, in a sense, they're forced upon us. It's an unsatisfactory answer, but the only answer I can really give is that we need to view human rights historically and, if necessarily, incrementally. Is it better that there was a civil rights movement in the United States? Is it better that women have more formal rights now than before? Is it better that people in South Africa are formally equal? Yes, but it's not enough. To go back to the Wendy Brown quote that I started with, is this the most that we can hope for? No. I think, therefore, and that's why I wanted to caution, from my perspective, of reducing politics to human rights. There's got to be more than that, so far as I'm concerned. There are broader questions of emancipation, of justice. And my basic argument is, let us use human rights tactically and strategically to those ends, rather than falling into the false belief that once we have them formally, we have achieved what we want, because we haven't. And yes, I think that there's an enormous problem of trying to use human rights that get co-opted, say trade-related, market-friendly rights, to break free of that co-optation. We have to try and find a different language, a different grammar that relates back to human rights. Because, in a sense, to go back to Spivak, we can't avoid them. We cannot not want them. We can't avoid them, because they're so bound up with the popular imagination, with ideas of legitimacy. But they can be used two ways. They can be used to expose illegitimacy in pursuit of something more than themselves. I know it's unsatisfactory. I find it that way, but I'm pushing, thinking, and welcome all kinds of responses that might prod me to open the door to a possible solution in certain ways.
Thank you so much. I would like to intervene about that. As ASEAN people, we don't like the term of people-oriented. We discuss a lot among the ASEAN people movement, and we want ASEAN centers that also mentioned in the charter. People-oriented and people-centered is also put in the ASEAN charter. But in the term of the people movement, we love the government to use as people-centered and people-oriented. Because people-centered is mean that we participate. We have fully participate. We are center of everything. We should be full participate in every process of the decision making. Everything is not with the ASEAN. But for people oriented, anyone can do for us. And government only claim that they do for people oriented. We don't want that. We want participate. We want full, meaningful participation on every process of decision making, and also every process in the ASEAN. So that is the first point that I would like to intervene. We as a people, we don't like ASEAN oriented. Government can do and say that they do for people because this is people oriented. This is one point, the first point. The second point, about the changes in ASEAN, I don't think that this comes from inside. It should be come from the pressure from outside. The pressure from outside is also come from the people itself, ASEAN people itself, empowering people power to make government change. Until now, I can see that the ASEAN is belong to the government, not belong to the people anymore. And also from the international community is also can make ASEAN change. In case of Burma, it is very clear it's come from the pressure from outside. Pressure from outside. In case of Burma, the Burmese people cannot do anything themselves. They need something from outside to make it change. The government never made a change. Sorry, as I said that the ASEAN government never made ASEAN change. Kun Surin Pisuwan, when he also tried to convince Burmese government during the Nazi time, it's also come from the civil society, that they start to say that the ASEAN civil society would like to support the Burmese people who affected by the Nazis. And this pressure to the Kun Surin Pisuwan, to our government to do something, is come from the people's side. It is not changed from the government side. But however, Surin is the key person who tried to do lobby with the government Burmese government to open to receive the support from outside and also engage with the other ASEAN countries. And I think that the Aisha itself, for us, we're very disappointed with the Aisha, the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. It still belongs to the government. You also can see that the TOR of Aisha is only promotion, no protection. Never have any article about the protection, very few about protection. And the TOR review is will be start this year, 2014. And I think that the ASEAN civil society is also start to discuss about the reviewing of TOR to give the protection in the mandate of the Aisha. And can see, again, this is come from people, this come from the civil society, not come from the government. Because when the Aisha representative make decision, I can mention some of them that independent representative from each country, from 3 countries. But however, the other is stand to protect the interests of the government, not protect the human rights of the people. So this is also one point that we can see that the human rights can use as a tool of the politics. It is not used as a tool of the to protect the people or protect the human rights. We can say that the human right is still in the hand of the politics, in the hand of the government to protect themselves. I can say that clearly because we do a lot of lobby and also do with a lot of advocacy with the Aisha to make Aisha change. But it's still far away from that. The human rights cause is also come from the civil society. When we doing the TOR drafting together with the high-level panel, the civil society also proposed human rights cause, and we know that it's very far away. But this year, during the review of the TOR, we start to talk again, rapidly raise this issue again in the discussion in the Aisha meeting, and we know that the human rights cause is like the higher mechanism of human rights that people can use that to bring the justice to the people. But however, we know that it is not easy to have a human rights court. And for us, we consider that the ASEAN itself is considered as an individual government, not the regional mechanism yet. So human rights court is far away because they do not think as a term of the cause of regional. And the declaration that you mentioned, you also can see that the CSO is very disappointed with this declaration because they put everything so beautiful and then come out depend on the national law. So what does it mean? So it is not the regional mechanism, it is the national mechanism that's important than regional one. So for us, human rights, ASEAN Human Rights Declaration is nothing for us. It's just only paper that they put and then they try to claim and try to implement and use that. I would like to make sure that all of the changing is come from outside, come from the people's side, come from the empowering, and it is far away. Human rights, the the community itself, the ASEAN people, many of them they didn't understand what is the ASEAN community. It's come from top down in the document, and it is very hard for all of us to educate the people to understand what is the meaning of the ASEAN community. And 2015, it will be another roadmap of the ASEAN community, and we now start to do something with the national process on look into the ASEAN community beyond 2015. It should be something come from us. We cannot give any hope to the government. This will be the same thing with the first roadmap that they. And when they do the evaluation, they say that 90% if implementation is success. For us, 0. For us, 10% less success. For us, it is different from the reality on the ground when government do the evaluation and do the report. So we as a people is also do monitoring and also monitor government report, government implementation. I think that sorry to say, to have different idea with you. And this is something from the reality from the ground, that we're working from the ground.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I understand the concern that you raised. That's also the concern of me when observing about the development of human rights mechanism in ASEAN. So what I mentioned about people orientation or people centric, actually it's referred to the context of the engagement of civil society. Unlike before, where civil society was considered, because many labels been given to civil society as a puppet for labels, puppet for agent for the Western countries, including the 80s, even the 90s. But now you can see that the engagement is happening. Where in terms of ICHA, there's an engagement between the civil society movement, NGOs with the states. So I think there's the different approach, accepted by ASEAN. So that's why I refer that people orientation, meaning that now they give people more to express themselves about the issue concerning ASEAN. And yeah, you mentioned about pressure from outside. Yeah, I know that's part of the reason why ASEAN changed is because of pressure from outside. And you mentioned about people. Actually, when I talk about people, I think what I mean is pressure from inside. People forced from inside for ASEAN to change, or government to change their position with regard to ASEAN. But I prefer to have pressure from inside rather than pressure from outside. Outside intervention is a bit problematic. We know that United States, European Union, pressure, and also from United Nations. For example, in the case of, like I mentioned, the Najis typhoon, in Myanmar, suddenly Myanmar changed the policy. Even though ASEAN engaged, but actually ASEAN have to engage with United Nations in order to foreign organizations to get involved. That's fine and acceptable for others. But of course, at the same time, you can see that many countries also get involved and later on engaging Myanmar. So yes, I agree that there's a pressure from outside that makes ASEAN change. I hope it's going to be a positive way rather than a negative way. Yeah, for ASEAN, yeah, I agree with you that still in infancy. It's still too early, and sometimes also I can see that the NGO also very aggressive, demanding ASEAN state to change. Probably the response given by them is very cautious. We don't want to change, and what happened to the national interest and so on. But yeah, I think the best way is the NGO, the civil society need to engage further and more with this. They're willing to change, but they don't want to rapidly change. The organization, also the state, because in the context of to establish a court, for example, they need the ratifications from the states, amendment to the constitution and so on. Process is very lengthy. So that's, I think, worrying some of the nation. And the main issue is still, I think I mentioned just now, is about sovereignty. Whether we can willing to surrender our sovereignty to another entities, consider can decide the case national more higher than national courts. Yeah, I can see that many disappointed. In fact, we've been observing about declaration, ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. You can see that many still element of state power that national court is still the most powerful court. There's no considered as a regional court and so on. But yeah, I think there's I don't know what to say anymore. But I think this is the good things. Now we need to educate people. And that's the most important thing. Because one thing I probably need to mention, because I get involved some of the seminar, engagement with the government with regard to human rights. So you can see that now national government, so in terms of human rights, they're willing to engage with the NGOs. That's I think good, good initiative by the government. At least they want to engage, rather than before totally disregard of this civil society movement and so on. And they want ideas and also how to improve human rights. But of course, some consideration there still, try to, because for example, like in the case of Asia, the issue of race, religion, ethnic is all still very sensitive, and so need to be deliberate thoroughly in details, how to overcome all these problems. So when it comes to human rights, then that's become an issue. It's very difficult to resolve. But somehow there's a change. That's the most important thing for me. Even though it's slow, but there's a change. So probably I hope I already answer your questions.
Because of time constraint, I would like to collect the remaining questions. Professor Yushkovsky.
Thank you very much. I would like to join predecessors to congratulate you for a very inspiring and interesting presentation, and that's why we are having so lively discussion. In fact, my first question to Sami was more or less also covered by Professor Kapoor, but I like the idea of the human rights horizon. It was a metaphor used by somebody that we are trying to reach that horizon, we reach it, and then we realize that the horizon is far, far away. That was the case of my country when we were struggling to abolish communism, and we were seeing that when the moment we reach the Council of Europe, that will be a paradise. And we reach the Council of Europe, we are part of it, and we are seeing that the idea of human rights is still far, far away from us. So that's why they will always remain. But my question for you is the following. You mentioned something that we should change the concept of policy of human rights from bottom up to top the bottom. Yeah? From up the bottom to bottom up. Yeah? So idea that we should start with this type of way of thinking of human rights as such. I have a difficulty with that, because if we would do this type of approach, you would never abolish, for example, death penalty. You would never be able to introduce prohibition of discrimination based on sexual orientation as such. In some areas, you really cannot do like this. Of course, you may say, well, you have to be patient, but if you would be patient, would make wait generations before we at least manage to impose legal standards like this, based on the enlightened governmental policy. So I wonder to what extent this should somehow be modified pending on the circumstances. That is my question to you. As a question to this regional ASEAN arrangement, I'm just wondering, do you believe that it's possible not to make ASEAN as a whole? But let's say start with the more limited regional arrangement. The European system started with few countries, not the whole Europe. And right now it's whole Europe is covered by it, but it started with a small. Do you think that there is a possibility that some within the ASEAN, some more homogeneous particular country may start to think of organizing their own arrangement and then inviting the others to join, if possible? Or that is one aspect. The other aspect is from the material point of view. Do you need to cover all spectrum of human rights, or maybe there will be possibility to limit to some kind of, let's say, some political and civil rights or some economic and social, not necessarily be ambitious to cover all spectrum of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Yushkovsky, Rami, please.
Thank you for the presentations. This is a comment to Aziz, I think following on from that lady's comment about this new neo-communitarianism. I think what troubles me is how adept authoritarian governments in ASEAN have become at appropriating international human rights discourse. So, and one particular manifestation of this is how authoritarian governments in this region select gongos, government-organized NGOs to engage with, and then say, we are engaging civil society. So the ASEAN Summit in Cambodia last year, the Cambodian government selected which NGOs were going to attend, and then the rest of the non-authorized NGOs, like the LGBT groups that came up from Singapore to give petitions and submissions to the ASEAN members, were hounded from hotel to hotel, where literally all their bookings were cancelled. The hotels they managed to book mysteriously had the electricity cut off, and they ended up, just couch surfing. That's one concern I have. And you brought up the example of Marwah in Singapore. I think that's quite a good example because Marwah in Singapore is non-Congo. It's independent. It's an independent civil society organization that our government just does not want to talk to. It would rather talk to its government-funded think tanks and government-sponsored think tanks, which it can then use to sanctify this process as having gone through a consultation with civil society. But I think one glimmer of hope on the horizon is to use what Sammy suggested, using the human rights discourse to exploit the contradictions of power. Right? And it's an opening for independent civil society organizations to say, look, the reality is so different from what you are talking about that something is quite wrong with this process. I'm just not sure that's going to happen before a lot of the formal declarations are put into place in the next few years.
Professor Sanders.
This has been a very good panel. On ASEAN, I want to make one quick point, which is that two of the members of ASEAN, Singapore and Malaysia, are internationally famous as holdouts in terms of signing on to international human rights standards. It seemed logical 2 years ago that Singapore would try to kill any reference to human rights. They don't have it in their own political discourse. Why would they allow it in ASEAN? They were smart enough to know that that was a loser, and so they behaved inconsistently because they saw great value in ASEAN, perhaps mainly for economic reasons. But we have now, on paper, a consensus on human rights at the ASEAN level, which we did not have before the Charter came into being. So in terms of thinking of incremental change, we'll give you a red star for that one. Okay. I have 2 points in relation to the very interesting discussion by Professor Edelman. In my own writing and talking, I always emphasize that human rights is new, and I put it in this way, that human rights, as we now understand it, is post-Second World War. It's post-UN Charter. It's post-1945, post-1948. It is common in some of the texts on human rights seek early, cuneiforms, religious, let's get a quote from Hinduism, let's get a quote from Judaism, let's get a quote from Christianity, let's get a quote from something, Buddhism, to convey the idea that human rights has some great time depth. As we now understand human rights, it is recent. And I think this is central, actually, in what you said, Sami. And we could put it in simple terms that it is a work in progress. In fact, various people have used slightly different phrases to say the same things. And so my reaction was, is human rights hegemonic? Is it oppressive and limiting? The two areas that I have been worked on myself in my career have been gay rights and indigenous rights. Both of those are new. Both of those are still works in progress at the international level and at national levels and at local levels. So this perhaps explains why I do not see a hegemonic system in place, a gospel in place, a sacred text in place. I'd like your reference to universality because of its progressive framing. I also am impressed, and I would like your reaction to this, to Moyne's argument that human rights comes into dominance as rhetoric and as a possible agenda with the failure of grander systems of change. So religious systems that will Christianize the world, that's gone. Systems that we will colonize the world and spread civilization from Paris to everywhere, that's gone. It's embarrassing now to speak of the mission to civilize. And the communist goal of transformation, social and economic transformation, very, very ambitious kind of goal, that is gone as well. And one says, okay, with those gone, with those junked, with those over and out, what we get is something much more modest. And I think this fits with what you have been saying. We shouldn't see human rights as sort of occupying every space in our political and social thinking. Nevertheless, we can see it as quite important and quite basic in terms of moving us towards better societies. But if we see it as modest, it's a little bit like you're saying we have to understand it's political. Because if it's political, it's a work in progress. If it's modest, well, it's something we can use. I wonder what your reaction is to Moyne's formulation on this. Okay, I think there's someone after me.
Yeah, those are excellent presentations, and I just wanted to give a supportive comment to the idea of subaltern cosmopolitanisms, and especially in terms of what it reveals about human rights, especially as narratives. And I think it's right that human rights as a kind of tool or as a means is relatively new, but what they were supposed to address is quite older, and it's about justice and emancipation, basically in a colonial world. That's what I think it comes from. And in that respect, it's interesting to note that in the 1860s in New Zealand, when the Maori were having their wars against the land wars against the settlers, they looked across the world to an example of one revolution which was supposed to have provided justice and rights for the people who fought it. And this revolution provided peace, it gave the land back to the people, it provided justice, and it provided rights. And it wasn't the French Revolution that the Maori were talking about, it wasn't the American Revolution, it was anything to do with England. It was the Haitian Revolution that Maori in the 1860s were talking about. And the Haitian Revolution in 1791 ended in the first constitution in modern times to explicitly outlaw slavery. Article 2, slavery is forever abolished. Right? So what we see here is not a Western kind of thing. It's not separate, but it's not a Western thing, right? And it's what I guess Santos would call as subaltern cosmopolitanism, extending around the world about something which is which people can find a unity in, which is justice and emancipation. Interestingly, in the Constitution, there is no we in the Haitian Constitution. There's no we, right? By and large, I think because people who were writing it, who were the Haitian elites, were a bit too afraid to say that they were talking on behalf of the people, even though they did some of the things which the people were fighting for and liberated themselves with regards to anyway, like the abolishment of slavery. The justice, narrative of justice, which the Haitians, the people from Saint-Domingue, 2/3 of which were from Congo, the justice kind of schematic that they were working in was articulated by a guy called Dutty Bookman, who was both Muslim and a voodoo priest. And he made everybody swear at the beginning of the revolution on point of death that they would fight for liberation. And he says, there's our God, and our God is the good God, and our God demands justice. Then there is the God of the whites, and the God of the whites demands of them to do evil things. Interesting thing about that statement, right, is that it might sound communitarian, but it's not damning anybody. If you listen to it carefully, it's saying The white people can't help it because they're following an evil god. They need to change their god, right? So in these subaltern cosmopolitanisms, what we find is we find frameworks which aren't cosmopolitanism versus communitarianism. They're not about that, and they're not about rights as a rarefied and abstracted thing. They're very, very embodied, but nevertheless they are universalistic in their enactment and in their philosophies. So I think, one of the things that we need to do with all this discourse about human rights is deprovincialise it. And Chakrabarti is wrong. It's not just that Europe is inadequate. Europe is dispensable.
And last one, Hitoshi. Sorry, I missed it.
Thank you. I think my question is to Sam, perhaps, and I just want to get your observation on the idea, or perhaps the view, and I have to say the provocative view, that human rights law is essentially an elitistic idea. It presupposes some beings, elitist idea. Yes, so it presupposes some being who are intellectual, has enough knowledge and education about the human rights, the contents, and also courage and resources to make a claim to exercise his or her own human rights. And human rights activists tend to be well-educated intellectuals, trying to help those who are not well educated or unprivileged in society, and sometimes the solutions they come up with may not necessarily address the actual needs those people who are suffering from human rights violations actually want. One good example is the rights of asylum seekers, or human rights of asylum seekers, of refugees, and the resettlement as a solution often advocated by human rights activists. The Myanmar or Burmese refugees in Thailand, isn't it? On the border. I think there was a resettlement program offered by the United States. And as I understand it, the majority of the refugees, the Burmese refugees, actually refused to be resettled in the US. I think some are resettled in Japan, but because of the various conditions, cultural or other reasons, they actually decided to go back to the refugee camp, thinking that the life in the refugee camp is better off for them, rather than the settlement in Japan or the United States. So I wonder, perhaps I'm probably asking you to elaborate on your views or understand or idea of the reappropriation of human rights, particularly in relation to those who are not so well educated or privileged, as opposed to the well educated human rights intellectuals.
Thank you for all the questions. I would like to give the floor to the presenters.
I'll try to formulate a response that hopefully will encapsulate all the questions, and I'll try to do it as briefly as possible. Question is where to start. Perhaps with refugees. I myself was a refugee, so this is has a profound resonance for me. And the idea of refugees then takes me to the idea of new human rights, of the refugees in Europe who found, as Anna Arendt said, that the rights of man proved to be a bit of a fantasy in the most egregious expression of sovereignty in Europe in the middle of the 20th century. And refugees symbolize the problem of human rights in the sense that the people who most need them are the people who don't have them. Now, human rights in the sense that you were talking about as new is correct if you look at the post-war period. And the problem of the post-war period is that two things, a contradiction was locked into place at the center of the international legal order at the end of the Second World War. On the one hand, the Charter was signed, which reinforces the idea of sovereignty. these myths of formal equality, so yeah, Ghana is formally equal to the United States. Well, non-interference in internal affairs. Well, anybody who suffered a structural adjustment program knows all about non-interference in internal affairs and voluntary assumptions of obligations. States can only assign treaties voluntarily, and we know that that's not true. So there's a problem with all these myths and ideas of sovereignty. But nonetheless, going to your presentation, sovereignty remains very powerful. It is more universal than human rights. And the period since the Second World War has been a period of halting progress, maybe one step forward and 2 steps backwards or sideways in trying to make sovereigns accountable. We talked yesterday about the International Criminal Court, but we can go back to Nuremberg, the Pinochet trials, the development of the International Criminal Court. Are we making progress? Because in Africa, the number of black leaders who have been brought before the International Criminal Court smacks very much of Western racialized justice. So, should we try and reform, change the International Criminal Court as a sign of progress, of making sovereigns accountable, or abandon it as another failed attempt, another domination, another failed Western dominated attempt at imposing a certain conception of human rights? On the other side, in the contradiction, so the Charter reinforced sovereignty. The Universal Declaration postulated at least an alternative principle for organizing the planet, as a legal principle, and that was human rights. And ever since then, there has been this lockstep unfolding of a contradiction, of attempting to deal with the contradiction. So we have, to relate to Robbie's point, the idea of cosmopolitanism is very much the idea of opposing sovereignty. That's why it's absolutely essential in terms of ASEAN to make the point that not only is sovereignty not actually what it is presented in international legal terms, but it's also the most problematic principle in the sense that the sovereigns who are making the arguments in the way that it's been done in Asia are trying to evade accountability. So we have a choice, a difficult choice, between the perpetuation of a state-centric sovereign order and an attempt to move beyond it. In relation to Moyne, in his book, The Last Utopia, his title says something about it itself, and has provoked quite a lot of interest and controversy. I think that, if human rights, in the way you were put it, replace the civilizing missions, I think the problem that I have and a lot of people have, and the way I try to present it in terms of the hegemonic view, is no. That they actually are another form of civilizing mission. It's an attempt to spread a Western idea of civilization. So, and it's I think it was Gandhi when he was asked what he thought about British civilization and said it would be a very good idea. But to go back to the idea of a certain type, a certain hegemonic view of human rights, who has them and who enforces them, and to the International Criminal Court, Milosevic may have been there, Charles Taylor may have been there, but Bush and Blair hadn't been there. And they are war criminals by any standard, and they reflect the problems of a certain type of people, a certain mentality, going around preaching about human rights and democracy. In terms of elitism, finally, I think I really do believe that human rights do emerge from below in relation to Roman as well. That if it's LGBT rights, if it's now we have a new disability convention. Nobody thought about rights of the disabled as human rights before. So if they emerge from the bottom up, they are not by definition elitist. And one of the things, going back to the idea of subaltern cosmopolitanism, of subaltern legality, is the fact that they originated in the West doesn't mean that they're owned by the West. They can be created by other people in their own struggles. The right to development, the right to self-determination, permanent sovereignty over natural resources. These were all so-called third generation or solidarity rights that emerged from the struggles of people in the global south, of subaltern peoples themselves. So the choice here is not necessarily about a suspicion about human rights per se. It's to say, hold on, you've got your view of human rights. It's a partial view. It's a tendentious view. It's a hegemonic view. But we can postulate, we can argue for, we can fight for another view of human rights. We can fight to add to the human rights. That if you want to confine your view of human rights to civil and political rights because they serve the interests of, in fact, really, global capital needs 3 rights. It's the right to property, the right to contract, and the right to consume. They're not very bothered about many of the others. They're different visions that need to be fought for, and I think that's part of the ongoing politics of it is to contest those particular visions. I hope that I've referred to everybody, but I apologize.
Thank you for the questions. With regard to the question about top-down, bottom-up. Yeah, sadly I can mention here is that many of the decisions, even policy, to top-down decision. In fact, when ASEAN was to impose ASEAN community, the people never been asked, whether they accept or not. Unlike like European Union, they have referendum for countries to decide whether to join or not join the Union. So far, in the context of ASEAN, never done such a referendum or ask the people whether they agree, accept to join. In fact, to join ASEAN as well, never been. There's no referendum, difficulties or even conducted by the states, for them to accept. But of course, back to your second question is whether I know some whether modify or not modify death penalty or so on, even the legislation and so on. I think it's difficult to argue in current stage, because national court, national legislation is still powerful, and so it's still the most important in all ASEAN nations. So that's why, in order to accept something new, more superior or more higher than national court, then I think probably you can change some of the legislations and also constitutions. But today I think it's a bit difficult because all states want to maintain their own system of legislation and also at the same time the law that they have in the countries. But whether in order to accept the human rights mechanism, some of the countries accept, some not, I think it's a bit difficult because in the ASEAN context, it's always whatever decision made must through consensus. They agree, and also sometimes agree to disagree in the context. So in order for only half of the member state to agree on one mechanism, half to the other, I think it's a bit difficult, and also it's not healthy also for ASEAN. Better it's a consensus decision accepted by all the states. Now we have a 10 member state. I think probably soon Timor-Leste also will join. Still under consideration by ASEAN member states, whether they accept Timor-Leste or not. But back to you, maybe the questions of Congo, government organization. This happened before, but now I think the states willing to engage the others, more critical, NGO. So in the case of Thailand, you see, and even Malaysia, even though Malaysia is known to be countries that really opposed to many ideas of human rights, but lately they engage the civil society movement. So then I think a good signs, but of course, we need to see the outcomes, whether it's good for human rights or not. Still yet to be seen. But of course, they like to engage Congo. The Congo is always pleased there. Please the Australian government. So back to the question about reality or not realities. I agree that there's a change, but government have an opportunity actually to manipulate the process. Because even though we have declaration commission, but the process sometimes can be manipulated. So that probably need to be observed cautiously by all NGOs, that ensure that government really implement human rights. So the last question probably, yeah, Malaysia, Singapore, always, rejected over many ideas about human rights, and Malaysia, I think doesn't ratify International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Many are even, even the Commission on Torture also, Malaysia didn't, ratify. So you can see that more or less the government is skeptical about human rights in the context of Malaysia. So it's a very hard time for them actually to accept the ideas of human rights, and in order for them to accept declaration, I think is a good sign from Malaysian perspective, and Singapore as well, I think. So sometimes we don't push them too much. If we push them too much, then they will retract. So probably by engaging, continuously, I think somehow in the future they will change, even though it's very slow process. So I think probably that's my answer to the question. So
yes, thank you very much. We are over time. I would like to close the panel, but and thank you, presentation, presenters, and audience for a very inspiring panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Adelman and Dr. Sani, and also Dr. Lee for such a splendid presentation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to a really important time again. We're going to have lunch